So it's 4 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Carol Serdar-Tepper. Thank you for attending today's Quimper Geological Society lecture presentation. And I appreciate everybody being here. I'll be referring to our group as QGS, so not to confuse you, that's the Quimper Geological Society. And today's presentation is going to be slightly different. I'm seated next to David. Okay, so first let me start with some information to remember. Please remember that the donations help QGS get the recordings of these presentations onto our website. And if you happen to write a check, please make it out to Jefferson Land Trust, and in the memo line, put the Quimper Geological Society. We have currently, 2 days ago, 1,166 members. If you just register to have your name, you provide us with your email address, we send you 2 emails related to the presentations, one 10 days before and one 2 days before the event. And then anybody after the event can access the video recordings on our website or on YouTube. All QGS lectures are at 4 o'clock on Saturdays. We've been doing this for many, many years, and we like that. We like people coming and being social with us. Thank you. Okay, the announcements. The next talk is currently scheduled for February 21st. Chris Goldfinger will discuss new evidence of seismicity connections between the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas Fault. It should be an earth-shaking discussion. This will be Zoom only.
Safer that way.
That's right, get under your desk. Okay, and then the only other one we have scheduled right now is May 2nd with Nick Zentner. He will be joining us for an in-person and lecture at the auditorium at the Chimicum schools. The last time he came, I think we had 328 people, so if you plan on attending, please come early. Nick will be providing us an exciting presentation about Washington's geology, but I just got the title of it is, Did Nevada, I changed it recently because I put a straw dog on the website because I can't stand not having at least a couple, 3 on the list. And I think I said, I put down he was going to be talking about Washington geology, but he is actually going to be talking, was the Sierra Nevadas formed in someplace?
Somewhere in Canada.
Oh, in Canada, that's right. So it's going to be related to his A through Z series currently on Alaska.
Were the Sierras formed in Canada?
No.
It seems weird.
Something in Canada formed in Nevada.
Oh,
So it,
okay. Who knows? You should come.
Please remember that we'll be updating the website when more people come to us and are interested in speaking. So check the website frequently. Like I said, you're only going to get 2 emails from us 10 days before and 2 days before. Okay, so I am the lucky one to be able to introduce our speaker today and actually interview him. That's how we're going to be doing something a little different today. Exploring history and nature in the city and beyond. The program is going to feature me interviewing author, naturalist, and tour guide David B. Williams about his 2 recently published books, Seattle Walks, Discovering History and Nature in the City, and Wild in Seattle, Stories at the Crossroads of People and Nature. David's stories are diverse and well-researched. I am amazed at the breadth of his knowledge, from the migration of barred owls into Washington to the local impacts of tsunamis, to where otters do their doo-doo, to the unique building stones. His books help us remember to get outside and see for ourselves the uniqueness where we call home. Please provide a warm welcome for David B. Williams.
It's an honor and pleasure to be here. I think this is my 4th time speaking to this group, so thanks. And do you want me to do a land acknowledgement?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, so we talked about sort of a land acknowledgement, and I think that's one of those things that we've all become used to and a little bit, I think, become perfunctory. But for me, the importance is of recognizing the people who've lived here for thousands of years and continue to live here and how they have informed our understanding of place, and I mean all of collective society. And one of the things that I've found in writing, and I talked about this the other night in regard to Indigenous people and hope, is that over the past few years, past couple decades, we've seen Indigenous people and the communities become more part of the decision-making process. So I think, to me, is honoring and recognizing that aspect of Indigenous people here and being part of the story. And the more I think we understand their relationship and our relationship, not only to place, but to them and how we all interact, the better we are. So for me, an acknowledgement is about being part of the story and trying to understand better those relationships between people and place.
Thank you. So we're going to do something a little different. And David, would you?
Yeah, so one of the things when Carol first proposed this idea to me, I said I would like to do an interview because I wanted it to sort of be tailored a little bit more to the group. And of course, one of the aspects for me of speaking to a geology group, that's what my degree is in, and I'm going to answer this question myself, but I'm going to start and turn it back on Carol initially. And, why are you into rocks? What up with the rocks in you, Carol?
Well, actually, I grew up within minutes of the shore. My whole life, I've lived within minutes of the shore of the Puget Sound. And I didn't particularly have a great high school experience, so I didn't really want to go to college, and so I worked in a bank with 48 women, no windows, and over half of them smoked cigarettes, so I wanted to be a park ranger. And the closest thing I could get into that as fast as possible was a degree in forestry at the Green River Community College. And I happened to have a physical geography professor who let me TA for him one year, and when he was going to do a trip down through the Canyonlands on the Green River, 121 miles to the confluence of the Colorado River. So I got to select some of the books to read, and I picked all the geology books. And while we were out in the Canyonlands, somewhere up Water Canyon or someplace, a People Dome, I was talking about the white rim rocks and
Wet rim sandstone, yeah.
And he said, "Carol, there's more to life than rocks." And I realized, no, there's not. Not really. So I ended up going into geology. I became a teacher, taught for 10 years. The last time I taught public school, I created a curriculum on the Pacific salmon. So my thesis from the Evergreen State College was on a large landslide that happened on DNR property, and that described and analyzed the landslide, but also the salmon impacts. So and then after I finished my master's, I got a job working as a geologist, and the rest is history. I guess mostly I was a regulator for the state, so there's some very interesting ties into the books that I read for today's presentation. Thank you, David. Mm-hmm. Okay, so David, tell us how the experiences, okay, so these two books, every chapter had experiences that I had in my life, every single chapter. It was a very, he writes in a way that is very interdisciplinary, and he also writes about the big picture as well as the fine details. How did you become a writer?
How did I become a writer? Well,
As a geo nerd,
No, GeoNerd is definitely, geology writer is my website, and oddly, when I went to college, I had no desire ever to be a writer, or did I have any inkling in my mind to be a geologist. I'd gone to college because I wanted to get a degree in engineering and design alternative types of bikes, like this was 40 years ago, and I wanted to design the bikes we're seeing nowadays where people carry everything and they're all sort of crazy things. And I took a physics class and I got a 16% on a quiz. And I realized I wasn't very good at physics, but I had taken a geology class. I had taken an introduction to geology class and liked geology and decided that I would major in field trips. And I mean, some people, it's basically, it's not, geology, that's what it was about. And where I went to school was unusual. It was one class at a time for 3.5 weeks, a block, a little school called Colorado College. And so we were every week, every block, I spent a week out in the field looking at rocks. So I basically fell in love with rocks. And I ended up moving to southern Utah. I was there for 9 years, which I may come back to that. But the other reason I went to Colorado College is there was no requirement to take a freshman English class. And you didn't have to take any English class. I thought that is great. I love reading, but I hate being told what to read or what to think about. Oh, look at the metaphors and the similes and all that stuff. I just didn't get what people were doing. I just wanted to read. So when I was in southern Utah, I ended up working for this little field school there, teaching and coordinating workshops. And was lucky enough to work with an interdisciplinary group of people, botanists, zoologists, people who are river rafters, all sorts of different takes on the landscape. And I realized that that's what really interested me, is those interrelationships, and sort of what Carol said, the interdisciplinary aspect of the natural world. And so I decided I would write a field guide to plants, animals, and geology of southern Utah, not knowing anything about what I was doing or how to do it, except that I knew I liked that area. I knew the people to ask to get the information. And then I started writing, and that's how I still do things. I come up with some idea. The book I wrote that'll be out a year from now on the Cascade Mountains, I knew I wanted to write a book about human and natural history of the Cascade Mountains, but I didn't know what that meant, so I just started interviewing, talking to people, reaching out, asking them questions, talked to Jeff a bit about geology and trying to understand this place and hearing and what people were passionate about and what interested them, or what are stories that aren't told. That's what was driving me as a writer, and that is what really imbues all of my books, both Seattle Walks and Wild in Seattle. And I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of the creation of each of those when we get a little bit more into them. But it was really a love of language and wanting to share what I had learned. When I graduated from college, my mom said to me, "David, I read through all your report cards and you never shut up in school." So I'm just continuing doing that, and you either benefit or lose out by having me never shutting up. So that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, David. Okay, being a native Washingtonian, these two books are simpatico with my life. Every chapter had physical and emotional relevance for me. Some nugget of connection to my places, current and past. The interview questions will be broken into the two books. First, we will discuss Seattle Walks. Okay.
There it is.
There you go. You want to?
Yeah, so Seattle Walks, this is the second edition of the book. It grew out of what's my favorite thing to do any place is to walk. I love getting out and walking and being at that speed of walking and being able to stop and look and pay attention and notice things. And so these walks, there's now 18 of them in the book, as you can see, sort of distributed throughout Seattle. And all of them weave some aspect of human and natural history in there. So one walk follows the historic outlet of Green Lake, which, if you know the city, little lake in the middle of the city used to flow down and end up where the Center for Urban Horticulture is near the football stadium, the Husky football stadium. Another one follows the historic shoreline of downtown Seattle. There's one that looks at carved and terracotta animals in the city. So they're just things that really struck me as interesting and fun. And so the book is all these different walks, they range from about 1.5 miles to about 6 miles. The longest walk is around circumnavigating Lake Union in Seattle. And they're very self-guided. You go from point A and I blabber away about something or another, what's in the text. And now that you've heard me, I'm sorry, you might hear me again if you ever read them. You might hear my voice. I apologize for that. But it's just a fun way for me to share stories of this place that is home for me. And I've been leading tours for a variety of different groups over the years, for museums, for friends, for my mom's walkie-talkie group. And so that was just a great way to take these stories that I loved and then share them. And I'm always interested, my goal as a writer, and I think what I'm trying to do in each of these books is to, and I said this the other night, is to naturalize myself to place. I didn't grow up here, so I'm always trying to learn the stories of the community, of the geology, of the plants, the animals, and then trying to share those as a way I hope to help people develop stronger connections and stronger relationships to landscape. Most of the Seattle Walks book is centered around Seattle, but the idea to me is one that applies anywhere, is get out and walk around and see what you find and stop and ask questions and be amazed. That there's so many amazing things wherever you live. It's taking that time to slow down and look, and that's what I try to do in each of these books. Seattle Walks is very much a practical book. It's like how to go from point A to point B. And Wild in Seattle, which I'll come back to, is more, I like to think, more inspirational ideas. But we'll come back to that.
Okay, thank you, David. Besides family or loved ones, everyone has favorite things in life they relate to or enjoy studying. Mine are rocks. So it is no wonder that my favorite walk in Seattle Walks is Stories in Stone. Jeff and I started out on Thursday in Seattle to do the Stories in Stones walk, but it was really nasty, rainy, icky weather. So we went to the Smith Tower and we went to the Exchange Building. And you have to push the little button and ask to come into the Exchange Building. They don't just let anybody in off the street. But
Well, they usually do this, just you two.
Oh. They locked the door when they saw us coming.
Yeah.
So I always had a phrase that I would tell my students: rocks tell stories. They thought I was a little crazy, but they do very well tell stories. David, please tell us why you were drawn to writing about building rock in Seattle buildings.
Yeah, so that started, so as I said, ended up in southern Utah after college. If you've been to that part of the world, it's sort of rock nirvana. There's geology everywhere, and it really informed my life as to who I was. I hiked, I biked, I canoed, I rafted in the canyons everywhere. And so it really was my life. And then my wife decided to go to graduate school, and we moved to Boston. And I'll give you one statistic. Population density where we lived in southern Utah was 2 people per square mile. Population density in Boston was 20,000 people per square mile. And so I really lost my connection to the natural world. I lost my connection to place. The only thing I knew about geology on the East Coast, I knew 2 things, but one was Plymouth Rock. I might have heard of it, but I didn't know anything really about it. And I knew that nothing had happened geologically on the East Coast for about 200 million years since Pangea started to break up. And nothing's really happened. It's sort of boring out there. But I started to look at the building stone as I started wandering around the city and noticing just this amazing array of geology in the buildings in Boston, and all of it polished, all of it accessible, all of it generally near a decent coffee shop or a restaurant, so you could get to it, you could enjoy it. So when I moved back to Seattle in 1998, I grew up in Seattle, and my wife and I moved back after graduate school. I started doing the same thing in Seattle. Obviously in Seattle it was much easier to find geology. There's, something happened last week probably geologically in Seattle as opposed to 200 million years ago. But I started looking at the building stone and thinking about those stories of the rocks and what did they say, and thinking about things such as looking at, all the older buildings in downtown Seattle are the result of really the Great Fire. Seattle burns down in 1889, and the buildings had all been made of wood, and they passed legislation that says, okay, we now have to build everything out of brick and stone. And there was no good rock, and there is no good rock at the surface in Seattle. So the builders start seeking out where's the closest good rock that you could find. Chuckanut, Tenino, Wilkeson become the three areas where building stone comes from. So it's this story of transportation, it's a story of architectural styles. And then as you look more and you start to find other building stones, the Indiana limestone, or Salem limestone as it's called, the most commonly used building stone in the US. It's what clads the Empire State Building. It's a star in arguably the finest movie ever made, Breaking Away. If you're familiar about that, The Young Boys, about biking and geology. It takes place, you can see the quarries in its fact. Just watch the movie, it's beautiful. And the oldest, the first railroad in the country, one of the first commercial railroads in the country was built to access stone in Boston, the Quincy granite to make the Bunker Hill Monument. So there's all these interconnections between the geology and between the architecture and the place. And so those stories, to me, what I love about them is they're so accessible. I mean, I've been leading building stone tours in Seattle for 25 years now, and always have people who've, said, well, I've walked by this building, 100 times. I've never noticed that. I never thought to look at that. And yet when they have that opportunity to look and to feel, in particular, this building, that's the rock that's shown up here, this is on the building that Carol mentioned, the Seattle Exchange building. This rock is the Morton Gneiss. It's 3.52 billion years old, and which is some of the oldest rock on Earth. There's some places further up. It comes from Morton, Minnesota. But I love going on this walk and telling people to reach out and touch that rock, because you are reaching back into the deepest time of this planet, so far back that you're basically the only life on Earth are single-celled or multi-celled organisms. The colors and the planet are completely different because we don't have plants, we don't have animals on the landscape. Plate tectonics may or may not have been operating 3.5 billion years ago. There's a debate as to when that starts to happen. So you're reaching just so far back, and to be able to share that with people, and that to me was a way to engage people in geology. I think, Seattle, Port Townsend, places like this, we know that geology is part of the story of these places, that's what has controlled so much, whether it's the movement of tides or how we get from point A to point B, the concern that we've got earthquakes or volcanoes. We know it living here, but to be able to then go and walk by it and make a connection, and that you can find fossils in downtown Seattle's, cinnamon rolls that are 6 inches, that look like ammonite 6 inches across, or go to the airport. Next time you get to the airport and you're in Terminal A or B and your flight is delayed, which I know doesn't happen at SeaTac. Look on the walls there. There's a grayish beige limestone from Germany and you can find these cinnamon rolls in there, or at least cross sections of ammonites. And I just think, wow, what a great way to connect people to the natural world. As a ranger, what I realized when I worked at Arches National Park for several years is that people would come to parks and they would ask all these great questions, or at least basic questions. What are the rocks? What are this? Why this? What's that plant? They ask they wanted to know about that natural world around them. And I would encourage them when they went back home to ask those same questions, because the stories in the urban environment are just as interesting as any story. And I would argue that the geology of Seattle is way more interesting than the geology of Moab, Utah. I mean, yeah, the red rocks are beautiful, stunning, but they're sort of boring. I mean, they're just a bunch of rocks stacked up. Here you've got earthquakes, landslides, you've got, all these great things that can happen to you, or horrible things. So again, building stone to me was such an easy way to try and connect people to place. So there's the long answer to your question.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, these books, these two new books, I bought a handful of them in tandem, both inscribed for special friends. So it's hard to separate the questions, and this question is just a little crossover, but it's really about walking. So the chapter, The Joys of Repeat Travel, encourages us to hike the same trail, but some walks stand out more than others. Some of us have favorites, so this question is in two parts. What geologic walk is your favorite anywhere on the planet? And then again, what's your favorite walk in the Puget Sound?
Okay. So obviously I knew the questions ahead of time, so I was able to prepare for this. This, if you're not familiar with it, is Thingvellir in Iceland. The valley there, which you can walk all the way from North America to Europe across. It's one of the few places where the plate boundary comes up at the surface, and it's pretty cool to be able to do that. I walked with my wife, and what you're seeing, the little waterways there are just that spreading center, and these things are sort of pulling apart and coming together there in a stunningly cool landscape. So from a single geologic spot, that is probably the coolest spot. Also in Iceland, you can go to Geyser, which is where the name comes from, and see this geyser that bubbles up all the time, and that was pretty cool. I love Iceland geologically, just the most amazing landscape, I think. Locally in Puget Sound, my walks, they go all over the place. I mean, one of the ones I really like a lot, I think is, oddly enough, is in West Seattle. And I think West Seattle gets overlooked. I was talking to who's from, yes, used to live in West Seattle, the island as they call it. But geologically, it's a pretty amazing place. The spot, let's see if I get this pointer right. Let's see. About at Alki Point, well, Alki Point's at the far side up there. But Alki is that little bench there where Seattle, quote unquote, began, where the Denny party arrives in 1851. They land at that spot in part, and it exists because of the Seattle Fault. If you're familiar with this little problem we have in the Seattle area from California running north, the Sierra Nevada runs into Oregon, block of mountains, and Oregon gets pushed into Washington State. Canada doesn't move, so we're being squeezed between Oregon and Canada, and Seattle has this massive fault that cuts east-west, basically from Bainbridge down I-90, or excuse me, from Issaquah across I-90 to Bainbridge, and it's uplifted the land a huge amount, but the most recent uplift was in either 923 or 924, big earthquake, and that bench where Alki is was uplifted about 20 feet at that point, so it becomes this nice flat bench. And when the Denny party arrives there, it's because it's sticking out into the sound. It's a nice flat level spot, which is unusual in the Seattle area. What's interesting I found about that spot, and this gets back to geology, I'll eventually answer the question sort of, is that in the 1830s, when the British were here, the Hudson's Bay Company, there was the person who worked for the HBC named William Fraser Tolmie sailed up, and he was looking for a place to build a new fort north of the one that was down at Fort Steilacoom, and he lands at what we call Alki, and he looks around as a potential spot to build a fort. And he goes, this is not a good spot because there's no fresh water. The closest fresh water is like a half-mile distant. And so he says, this is not a bad spot. And I always think, what would have happened if that had been a British trading post? Would Seattle's story be different there? So you have this uplifted bench that's sort of cool. But then as you go up into then you climb up out of there, up onto the high point in this walk, you're up on one of these sort of drumlins that, glacially formed landscape of Seattle. And so you have this combination of the underlying geology of the faults, and then you also have the more recent geology. So to me, it just sort of brings both of them together in this landscape. And I just find that sort of a fun little spot to walk there. And it also goes through one of the few old growth-esque forests in Seattle. Schmitz Park in Seattle is one of 3 places that still has some original uncut trees. And if you go in there, it's just a stunning green space with massive Douglas firs and cedars and big old maples, and it's a beautiful place. But it ties to that geology of the whole region. And so for me, it's a very geological walk, but one, if you just look at it, you would think, it's not really that geologic, but it is. Like Carol, I see rocks everywhere. It's like that kid who, I see ghosts everywhere. I'm one of those people, I watch a movie and I notice the building stone in the background. I always see geology, and so it's fun for me I always try and sneak it in.
Thank you. Okay, Seattle Walks has a rich history embedded in the walks. But as a geologist, I'd like to know, what is your favorite landform in Western Washington? And can you see it on one of the walks in this book?
No. Sadly, my favorite landform in Western Washington is Mount St. Helens. Not sadly, my favorite landform in Washington is Mount St. Helens. Sadly, you cannot see it from Seattle. I just think if you haven't spent time at Mount St. Helens since the eruption, it is the most amazing landscape, I think, in Washington State. Just to be out on the Pumice Plain, there in front of the mountain, to see the recovery of that landscape and the change over time is amazing. The youngest glacier on the planet is in the crater that started forming after the eruption in 1980. So it's a 45-year-old, is that 45? Yeah, year-old glacier, and that's pretty stunning to be able to think about that. But that, and just their other aspects, it's such a cool landscape. I was privileged enough last summer to go down 3 or 4 times doing research for this book about the Cascades. The last chapter in my book on the Cascades is just about Mount St. Helens. It's the only mountain that I focus just on it as an entire chapter in the book, because I think the geology, the ecology is so amazing. So go down there if you haven't been. If you can get there, it's a real pain in the butt now.
Okay, now let's chat about Wild in Seattle. Want to give a little...
Okay, so this book grew. I've been, for the last almost 5 years now, I've been writing a weekly newsletter on Substack called The Street Smart Naturalist. And these essays, 600 to 800 word essays, are all over the place. Last week's was looking at the new Frankenstein movie by Guillermo del Toro, and the wolves, the horrible depiction of wolves in that book, and comparing that with the research that just came out of Bella Bella up on Vancouver Island of this wolf. They were setting up these traps, underwater traps, to catch European green crabs. And the traps are underwater. There's a rope that goes from the trap to shore, and then a rope that goes to a buoy. So you really can't see anything with what's going on. And the traps were being broken into. And they set up a video camera, and within 24 hours, they saw a female wolf come up, pull the rope out of the water. You see her go, get it, pull it, get it, pull it, get it, pull it. She eventually pulls the trap up on shore, rips it open, and has lunch, or maybe it was dinner. But so they're just these essays that are all over, that allow me just to explore this place that I love, and other things. I mean, it's my brain sort of, I'm all over the place. I'm curious about everything, and so I'd love to be able to do this. So Wild in Seattle is a collection of 45 or so of the essays over the years, over the first 3 years of working on that, writing that newsletter. And then it's paired with these amazingly gorgeous and whimsical illustrations by a woman named Elizabeth Person. You may be familiar with some of her work. She's the person who does the gorgeous profiles of the mountains that you've probably seen, and then really wonderful map views, often done with sort of these blues and yellows. I just think her work is stunning. And the mountaineers asked her to illustrate each of the essays, and I just think she knocked it out of the park. I mean, if you don't like any of the essays, and I get it, the illustrations are they're alone worth the price of admission. It's just beautiful, beautiful work.
They are very beautiful,
They are.
thank you. David asked if I would, if he could read my favorite chapter, but I had a really tough time figuring out which one was my favorite, because each one of them had some meaning to my life, whether it was something I regulated, like surface mining, and the discussion or the chapter on Limekiln State Park, the cement, what's the titles of that? I can't remember. But
Something.
Otters in Our Mist was the second contender, but really I asked him to read Agents of Erosion, which is near and dear to my heart, living here in Port Townsend, and you'll know why.
I just want to say Otters in My Midst gave me the opportunity to go out with a biologist and collect otter poop, which is pretty cool. And if you didn't know, otter poop has its own name. It's called a sprite. Not many other poops have their own name. So your next cocktail party, you are ready. So this is Agents of Erosion.
I'll get my little.
This is the image that Elizabeth did for the book. My college housemate and I, both geology majors, like to call ourselves agents of erosion. We didn't do anything to merit the sobriquet. We just thought it was funny, especially if it was said in a supervillain kind of way. Agents of erosion. Geology doesn't have that many funny things about it, so we took what we could. I'm not sure anyone would have agreed with us regarding our status or our sense of humor, but I'm used to that. To be frank, saying agent of erosion, even without trying to sound stupendous, still tickles me. By the way, erosional operatives such as roots, salt, ice, and acid rain are everywhere in an urban environment. Some people might more correctly refer to them as weathering agents, as they merely weaken substrates such as concrete and asphalt and don't ferret away the broken up bits, the mission of agents of erosion. Both forces are at work in Seattle and every other town and city. Winter is the season of reckoning with these nefarious urban forces of dilapidation and disintegration. When it snows, the city puts chains on bus tires, which is necessary for safety, but also foments the weakening and cracking of pavement. Cold weather also leads to the growth of potholes, because water has a rather unusual property of expanding when it freezes. As I'm sure you're well aware, only a handful of substances do. When most liquids freeze, their molecules slow down, their bonds tighten, and they become more compact. The expansion of water translates to potholes as water infiltrates pavement and turns to ice and cracks its surroundings. This may trouble vehicle drivers in the city, but we need to get over ourselves because the ice expansion, about 9%, is a good thing for Earth. If water didn't expand and float when it becomes ice, I wouldn't be here to write this, and you wouldn't be here to benefit from my scintillating prose. I'm also very modest, in case you haven't figured out. And you wouldn't be here to benefit from the bottom, which would probably benefit no one, particularly anything. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Because lakes would freeze, I apologize that, because lakes would freeze from the bottom up, which would probably benefit no one, particularly anything wanting to live in a lake that could become a solid block of ice. So the next time you hit a pothole, rejoice at the life-affirming origin of the water and the ice that formed it. Less tied to life on Earth, but also problematic in the urban environment is salt, another unraveler of the urban fabric. It is particularly troublesome in cities that salt their roads in winter. The salt also arrives from the atmosphere and wave action. After it has infiltrated concrete or stone, salt crystals begin to grow and weaken the surrounding material. I have to admit that I have taken advantage of how stone cannot withstand salt and ice weather and have flaked off layers of sandstone building blocks, illustrating that I actually am an agent of erosion. I also have another more subtle effect on my ongoing role as an agent of erosion. And not to forget, all of you out there, you too play the same role. All of us erode stone stairways, one microbit at a time as our shoes strike and scrape the granite, limestone, sandstone, or travertine used for stairs. One place to see this is in Seattle, at Suzzallo Library on the University of Washington campus, where decades of feet have created a slight indent in the travertine tread. The effect is far more pronounced in much older buildings, such as the Leaning Tower of Pisa, Westminster Abbey, and Angkor Wat. Humans are not the only living agents of erosion. Trees are notorious for the problems they cause with streets and sidewalks, which are no match for the forces roots impart. Ever expanding and spreading, roots buckle, deform, warp, disfigure, contour, and destroy the urban infrastructure. On some streets, I feel that I'm on the surface of the sea as tree after tree thrusts up the sidewalk, creating regular waves of concrete that make walking difficult. The challenge raised by roots can be costly to cities. From 2020 to 2023, people filed 151 claims related to sidewalk falls against the city of Seattle, which led to the city spending $358,100 in settlements. Because of this issue, the city restricts what trees can be grown along sidewalks, banning big leaf maple, cottonwood, and willows, for example. I still consider myself an agent of erosion, though I know that I'm pale in comparison to the great agents affecting the urban environment. In contrast to me and my limited time spent wreaking havoc, they are always at work. As they say, geology bats last, as well as first, second, and so on.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
My next door neighbor loves the potholes. She believes that they are, it's like a speed bump, and her grandchildren are more safe with more speed bumps. So, if you have not taken advantage of David's newsletter, weekly newsletter, he now has the option of reading it. You can have him read it to you. So
Not one-on-one. I'm not going to come to your house. I just want to clarify that, Carol. It made it sound like I'm going to come to your house.
It's a recording of David reading the weekly newsletter. And really the reason why I selected this was because I couldn't, he has a voice when he writes, and I can hear that when I read his writing. But I couldn't hear agents of erosion in that supervillain sound or tone. Okay. So how has being a geologist helped you understand the interconnectedness of the Puget Sound and those that call it home?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, this, I'm talking to the choir here, you recognize that geology affects, so many aspects of our lives. I mean, I think about Seattle, the Seattle Fault, this uplift. And in the 1870s, when Seattle in particular started to mine the coal on the east side of Lake Washington in areas like Black Diamond and Coal Creek, that coal is at the surface in the Seattle area at least because of the fault pushing it up and thrusting the older rocks up closer to the surface. Once you get due north of the fault in Seattle, you don't see the coal beds as much. Or I think about biking across the city, and I've been biking in Seattle all my life, and going north-south is much easier. Going east-west, you're going up and down the ridges and valleys carved by the glaciers, crossing the landscape. So I mean, just on an individual basis, there's so much that affects us, and the story of Seattle in particular, and that's the place obviously I know best and love best. You can't separate, to me, the story of Seattle from the story of its geology, because so many of the projects that have driven the city over time, the big projects, the Denny regrades in Seattle, the only reason that the city could go in and literally remove a hill is that it's glacial material and it's just a big pile of dirt or a big pile of soil. They did that in a couple of different places, the Denny regrade, Jackson, and Dearborn. But again, we couldn't do that except for the fact that you have this very soft material. And we've had to do it because of the glaciers coming in and how they've carved the landscape and the ravines, the lake, the lakes, Puget Sound, this pinched landscape. And so that aspect of geology really affects just the topography of place. But then you have the bigger picture and thinking about the formation of the Sound and these two great mountain ranges of the Olympics and the Cascades tying to that geologic story. And how does that influence the plants of this area? You know, we cross over the Cascades and everything changes on so many different ways, but water being just a fundamental, the rise of those mountains creating that rain shadow. And we can go back and look and see the rise of the mountains. We can see where rain was pretty evenly distributed across the state, and then you start to get the rise of the Cascades and the rain shadow form. So that's part of the story of place. So much of what goes on in a landscape, particularly a dynamic one, a young one like this, I mean, that's one of the things that's, I think we all recognize that we are a young and restless landscape, and we are a teenage landscape, and it's unpredictable, not terribly controllable. We have 3 major fault zones. We've got a couple of volcanoes that are going to erupt sometime soon. So there's always something going on here, and that is good and bad. I mean, I think we like this place because of that, but we also struggle because of the geology of this place. But we wouldn't be here except for the geology of this place. That's what makes it. That if we wanted boring, no offense, we'd be in Nebraska or Kansas, geologically, and topographically.
Thank you.
I'm biased.
Thank you. Wild in Seattle has a lot of really great chapters, but is there one in particular that would help us, if you help us understand how dynamic our the environment is that we live in?
One part of Wild in Seattle. Yeah, I mean, Wild in Seattle, so much, just to back up a little bit on it, and I didn't say, is that the book is divided into 3 sections or 4 sections. There's a geology section, there's sort of a plant section, and then there's sort of an interdisciplinary section on different ecosystems, plant, animal, and that. And so this image, this to me is who I am. Being a dork and looking at building stone. There are certain chapters that, to me, the chapter that I think best expresses what I was trying to do in the book, if that's sort of what you're kind of asking, is this one you mentioned earlier, the road more traveled, and that repeat travel, going back over and over to a place. There's a bike ride I do every week almost in Arlington with my best friend on the Centennial Trail, and it's a fairly boring trail, but we've now done it several hundred times, and going back over and over and seeing the landscape anew, riding there when the trail is completely covered in leaves, or where there are a bazillion slugs out, or it's covered in ice, or it's raining, or we've ridden over this, we ride over the Stillaguamish River where it comes together, and we've seen it range from about 500 cubic feet per second to over 80,000 cubic feet per second. And to see that dynamic of place and to develop that relationship to place, again, it gets back to what I said at the very beginning, I'm trying to naturalize myself to place. And these essays all sort of center on that idea of what is the story of this place through a variety of different ways of natural history. I mean, there's a fair number of essays that focus on very urban built environment, because that interests me too. But the natural history essays really are about understanding the rhythms of this place and going back over and over. We do it all the time. I mean, I don't deny I do it all the time. It's like, oh, we hiked there. It's like, well, I hiked there twice. What did I see? I had 363 other days that I didn't see it, and hours and such. So I think that really sort of exemplifies who I am as a writer in this book.
Is there a chapter that has particular meaning for natural hazards?
Oh yeah. I love, in case you didn't know the difference, This to me is just, this to me is the whimsy of Elizabeth, that in case you didn't realize what the difference between a tornado, tsunami, and a volcano was. So this chapter is called Tsunamis in the Sound, and sound is spelled T-S-O-U-N-D. See, it's not really that funny. That's why I said that. No one really appreciates it. And one of the disadvantages or advantages of writing a newsletter every week is I don't have an editor. And what this book had an editor, and so some of the most ridiculous things that I wrote in the newsletter were edited out, probably for the better. I'm not much of a cell phone user, but I do like the periodic way it keeps me in touch with the world, such as getting a tsunami advisory on my phone. One was triggered on January 15th, 2022, by a massive underwater eruption near Tonga, almost 6,000 miles from Seattle. The advisory was similar to my first ever tornado advisory for Seattle, which I received 2 months earlier on November 9th. Neither played out, but I still appreciate the alerts. I suspect that it will not be the last tsunami warning I get. Geologists, ethnographers, and archaeologists have found evidence for several tsunamis that lashed down Puget Sound and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The one with the best geologic evidence, at least around Seattle, results from the last movement of the Seattle Fault Zone in 923 or 924. The crustal zone of weakness created a tsunami when its south side thrust up and caused the displacement of water that led to waves spreading across the sound, one of which deposited a trunk of Douglas fir and a fine layer of sand on the beach at West Point in Discovery Park. Other tsunami deposits include one at Lynch Cove near Belfair at the tip of Hood Canal. In geologist Carrie Garrison Lacey's PhD dissertation, she describes 2 layers of silt at Lynch Cove deposited by a tsunami generated by earthquakes off the Washington coast. The most recent of these earthquakes occurred on January 26, 1700, when what is known as the Cascadia Subduction Zone ruptured. This means that tsunamis can make a 90-degree turn at Admiralty Inlet and then turn again to enter Hood Canal. As my wife would say, physics did that. It goes on from there, but that idea that tsunami, we definitely have some issues.
Did you want to give us a little
Oh, I want to talk about.
precursor to?
Oh, yeah, so I also just wanted to show you a couple of pictures and then we'll come back to, this is the Exchange building, if you've never seen it in downtown Seattle, the bottom showing the rock. And then this was just another geology thing that I thought was sort of fun. This is the light rail station, and if you look in the right side of the picture, you can see stalactites forming at the light rail station, and I thought that was pretty cool, which then sent me on an expedition to parking garages in Seattle, which I do not recommend doing. It's rather gross. But I did find a number of them, a number of spaces around the city where you do find these stalactites. So again, I just love that aspect. These nutty stories are all around us. And then Carol and I were talking about this, and earlier when we were thinking about this, I wanted to make a connection, because this is a geology crowd, that the stories that I tell and thinking about this place, the Northwest, the tsunamis, the dangers, were really hit home very hard for me. In late September, my wife and I had the privilege to go to Japan and hike for a couple of days along the northeast coast, where the big earthquake hit in 2011 and the tsunami. And what you're looking at here is 2 seawalls. On the left side of the image is a modern seawall, the one on the right. If you look, it's hard to tell, but that seawall is about 20 feet high, and as you go down, basically the middle third of that seawall was completely wiped out by the tsunami there. And in response, this new one was built that's about 30 feet tall. It goes from one side of the valley all the way across to the other valley wall. And you see this throughout going down the coast. And it was just this stunning example of tsunamis and that impact on the landscape. that I don't think we just don't experience here. And I mean, it really grounded the story of geology. This is a building that was in one of the cities hit, and the very top of the building, this right here, this was that line up there, that was the elevation of the tsunami wave hitting that building, about 55 feet high. And they left this building, it's right in the middle of a valley, and so to the right side of the image is where the ocean is, but they left it there. I mean, you can just still see it still sort of spilling out, the problems. But the seawalls that they built stretch for dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of miles along that coast in places. It's just phenomenal. And the final part, about this story, and I know that I sometimes make light of geology, but I also fully recognize that it's also terrifying. And this, one of the things I hadn't realized and hadn't thought of with the tsunami is when the tsunami waves came, not only did the tsunami kill people, it also unearthed thousands of graves. And this is a cemetery, and the foreground of this picture right here, these are just tombstones. They have no idea where they came from or where they go. And literally thousands of these tombstones in graveyards throughout that east side of Japan. But again, I know you all know this, thinking about geology and the connection, but that connection is just, to be in Japan was, I just feel like I need to share this story because it was such a powerful impact upon me, upon my understanding of my relationship to place. And yeah, we live in a scary place, and we are privileged that this has not happened here.
Thank you, David. Okay, for me, the writing in Wild in Seattle is Thoreau-like, but David goes a bit deeper into encouraging us to be more active in our walks. He prods us to get outside and see for ourselves. Thank you for your attendance today, but I would like to first, before we open it up to questions, I read David's Happy Thanksgiving and loved the image of David with his PB&J. And when I was shopping yesterday, I saw this new Trader Joe's bag. So I thought, oh, I have to get this for David. But I couldn't just give it to David. I couldn't give it to David without something inside of it. So I'll let you pull that out.
Oh.
And Marjorie probably makes all of the jam that goes into his PB&Js, but
No, thank you. That is so nice. How exciting.
I can open it up. I'm not very talented.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my god. PT raspberry. Wow, it's way better than Trader Joe's. Strawberry. Well, thank you. How exciting. Oh my god. I love the jam.
thank you for your attendance, and we have time for just a
I'm happy to answer questions. And
thank you, David.
And Carol's going to bring a mic out, and I'm also happy to repeat questions if you
Thank you.
have any. There's one on your right there.
I don't know whether you can answer this or not, but I'm just curious. You spent a lot of time paying attention to certain indigenous communities around the Puget Lowland, and we have a history of natural hazards and disasters. And I'm just curious if you could talk, if possible, about whatever legends or whatever histories that the indigenous communities have that reflect a history of natural hazards.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've read about them. There's a couple of papers that came out, in particular by a woman who's at UW, Ruth Ludwig, who wrote more about them. And then you see some of these stories, in particular in relationship to the Seattle Fault along the Duwamish River. I do not remember them well enough to feel really qualified, but one of the ones that does stick out, I was talking to someone about geology and the last ice age, and the Skokomish River, which is the one on the peninsula. Is that the Skokomish or the Sko? I always get it wrong, Skokomish. That there's a place name along there that seems to reflect the original flow of the river before it's different than the Ice Age, and that this could be a name that's persisted for 10,000 plus years. And I think that's sort of incredible, and I'm sure there are more stories like that. Interestingly enough, this new book on the Cascades has a chapter on glaciers, but I could not find any stories that related to glaciers in indigenous communities here. You go north and there's, up in Alaska, in Canada, just amazing stories. But down here, we don't, and I don't know why, and I think the only thing I can guess in part is that, at least from an ethnographer point of view, they didn't ask. Ethnographers didn't ask those questions, and so a lot of it, that there's challenges that we don't have stories, we're not recorded, because ethnographers just didn't think to ask that way. But yeah, that's an interesting. If you have a chance to get the Ruth Loveland papers, or if you don't and you email me, in the back there's a postcard with information about what I do. I'll be happy to send those papers to you if you want more information. I have them. It's not stuck in my head right now. But thank you for asking that. Yeah, in the very back.
My understanding of Lake Washington is that when it originally drained through the Black River into the Duwamish.
Yes.
And then when they lowered it, it then drained out through the cut.
Yes.
And so the salmon that go to Issaquah.
Yes.
Did they just relearn that new route, or was that an introduced?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, a good question. So it's a really interesting question. So the first part of the question is that Lake Washington originally flowed out its south end through the Black River which then intersected the White-Green River system and then became the Duwamish. And then when the lake was lowered in 1916 for the ship canal, and that the Black River dried up and the lake now flows out through the ship canal, what did the salmon do that had previously swum up the river, up the Duwamish and the Black to enter Lake Washington and then to enter the Cedar River? We don't know for sure, but there's several thoughts behind that. One is that the canal that connected Lake Washington through Lake Union to Shill Shoal and Salmon Bay has been in existence since the late 1880s, because there was an earlier canal that was carved much smaller. So there was probably water flowing through, and there were probably salmon that may have been following that route already. Second is that when the locks were built, there were probably fish that were living in Lake Washington, and they migrated out through the new route, and that passed along. That's that knowledge, if you will, passed along. And then the third part is that if you think about salmon movement, if a salmon swims out of whatever comes out of Lake Washington, whether they are coming out through Elliott Bay or through Shill Shoal, and they swim north and do whatever they do, it's not that far from the Duwamish to the ship canal. So the chemistry, they probably figured it out pretty quickly. We're fortunate that fish like that have really good senses of where to go. We also know that there's a certain percentage of salmon that are like my dad, who get lost crossing the street. So it's probably a combination, but no one was looking at that. Those are all just ideas I've gathered from talking to biologists over the years as to what may have happened, but we don't know. But it's a really interesting question. Thank you. Oh.
Jeff?
Okay, so when you write about building stone, one of the things I really like is that you talk about the quarrying process. So in the process of researching this, do you go to quarries?
Oh.
And if so, what are your favorites?
Do I go to quarries? Yeah, I wrote this book called Stories in Stone that looks at 10 different building stones, or types of building stones from mostly around the US, but two of them from Italy. The travertine that was quarried outside of Rome, that was used to build the Colosseum and then makes it into Seattle and many other cities. And then the Carrara marble, Michelangelo's rock. So I went to those quarries, and of all the chapters, those are the only two my wife came with me. She didn't go with me to Indiana. She didn't go with me to a little quarry in eastern Colorado. But yeah, I would go to wherever I could, I would go to the quarry. So I've been to the quarry where the Morton Gneiss, this 3.5 billion years stone came from. It's tiny, it's just a little tiny quarry. I've been to the Indiana limestone quarries, which are by far the biggest in the United States. Each one was sort of amazing to be at and see and try and understand, try and see how people built stuff. Probably the two smallest were the quarry. There's a gas station in eastern Colorado that's made of petrified wood. And I was trying to figure out where that petrified wood came from because we don't know exactly where the quarry was. So this little town of Lamar, I took out an ad in the newspaper saying, does anyone know anything about this? And I got an email within a few days from Dr. Elmer Sniff. Such a great name. And he said, oh, when I was a kid, he was in his 70s or 80s, so when I was a kid, we would go down to this private property where there was petrified wood, and my mom told us, we could look at it, but don't take any. Well, the guy who built the building, he went down to that property and stole the building stone and brought it back, and my mom always didn't like him for that. So that's a little one. Then the other one in St. Augustine, Florida, there's the fort there, Castillo de San Marcos, is made of coquina, which is, if you know coquina, it's the rock that looks like Rice Krispie treats, but uses shells instead of Rice Krispies. And it's just quarried from little areas around there. And when I was doing the research, every place that it was an outcrop, people said, oh, this is where the quarry this is where the stone for the Castillo came from. Sort of like, George Washington slept here. There's the equivalent, they got the rock from here. But it was just fun to go to those places. It's amazing how nice people are when you express an interest in what they do. And they want to share the story. So yeah, I just would, like, hey, can I come and see the quarry? It's like, oh, okay. Sure.
David, I have a maybe trivial question.
Okay.
The stalactites coming out in the dreams, the light rail station, is that calcite or carbonate? Is it coming out of this cement?
Yeah, so the stalactites, as far as we know, as far as I've been able to track down, no one's looked at it, but I did find someone who studies stalactite or catholite growth, and it's always in cement, it's always in concrete, and it's that calcium carbonate. It's the exact same process as in a cave. It's just dripping down. And this guy did the studies. He could tell you, what's the best rate of dropping, of dripping, and all sorts of stuff. I just found it really interesting. And again, as we all know, anything that there's always someone who studies it, no matter how odd. But stalactites, nutty stuff. So,
Thank you. We have time for one more question. And if there are no more questions, David does have more books in the back for sale.
yeah, and I also I need to point out this because I always point it out. I gave a talk the other night at the library, and this vest. So every time I write a book, my wife makes me a new vest. And so this is my most recent one. The other night I wore my rockfish one because the book was about home waters. This is one, there's a couple cool pen pockets, there's different birds in back. And if you're actually interested in meeting the fabulous artist, Marjorie's in back there. She's going to be helping with the sale. So thank you, Marjorie. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.